On a humid morning in Jackson, Mississippi, 8-year-old Maya Taylor set off with her colorful backpack to buy candy at a corner store. Despite her young age, she was already used to cautious glances and the quiet tension that lingered in her neighborhood. The area carried stories of discrimination and abuses, but Maya, with her childlike innocence, still saw the world through curious eyes. At the Central Police Station, Officer Ray Matheson was wrapping up his early morning patrol. Known for his short temper and controversial behavior, Ray had a track record riddled with complaints, but had never faced real consequences thanks to powerful allies within the department. His history included violent stops and racially charged remarks, all of which were conveniently buried under doctored reports. As Maya entered the store, Ray was cruising the area, looking for suspicious activity. Their encounter would be brief, but its repercussions would ripple across the entire city. Inside the store, Maya was carefully picking out her candy when Ray stormed in, his sharp gaze scanning the place for trouble. His sudden arrival startled the shopkeeper and the few customers inside. Spotting Maya with her backpack, he immediately zeroed in, convinced she was hiding something. "Stop right there. What's in the bag?" Ray barked, his voice harsh and intimidating for someone so young. Maya, confused and scared, tried to answer, but Ray had already made up his mind. She was guilty. Ignoring the shopkeeper's protests and the murmurs of other customers, Ray cuffed Maya, accusing her of theft. The scene was shocking. A crying child, a relentless officer, and bystanders too afraid to intervene. But what Ray didn't know was that Maya wasn't just any little girl. She was the daughter of Captain James Taylor, the most respected and influential officer in the department. By the time Ray brought Maya to the station, the arrest had already caused a stir. Several staff members recognized the girl immediately. When word reached Captain Taylor, shock quickly turned into fury. Known for his integrity and willingness to confront injustice, even within the system, Taylor wasn't about to let this incident slide. What followed would place Ray in an untenable position and ignite a chain of events that would shake the department to its core. The Jackson Police Department was a sprawling, aging building with its fair share of history etched into the faded walls. Inside, a mixture of camaraderie and rivalry brewed among its officers, shaped by the pressures of a demanding job and a community that often viewed them with suspicion. It was in this volatile environment that Captain James Taylor had earned his reputation as a steadfast, principled leader. His presence commanded respect, his record spotless, and his dedication to fairness unwavering. Maya, his daughter, was his pride and joy. James had worked tirelessly to shield her from the ugliness of the world he navigated daily. Her sweet, curious demeanor was a stark contrast to the harsh realities of his job. To James, Maya represented everything worth protecting, and now she was at the center of a travesty he couldn't ignore. Officer Ray Matheson, on the other hand, had built his career on cutting corners and exploiting loopholes. Raised in a culture that encouraged dominance and feared vulnerability, Ray had always been a man who sought control. The years of unchecked behavior had hardened him, making him quick to act and slow to reflect. To Ray, Maya wasn't a child in need of protection. She was a suspect, no different from anyone else he had targeted in his career. At the station, Maya sat in a cold interrogation room, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized chair. Her tear-streaked face and trembling hands betrayed the fear she was trying to suppress. Across the hall, Ray was boasting about his arrest to his peers, oblivious to the storm about to descend on him. The moment Captain Taylor entered the station, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to him as he made his way to the holding area. His face was a mask of controlled rage, his strides deliberate and unyielding. He stopped in front of the interrogation room and peered through the glass window. The sight of his daughter handcuffed, scared, and alone sent a jolt of fury through him. "Who's responsible for this?" Taylor's voice was low, but carried a weight that made every officer in earshot stiffen. Ray, ever brash, stepped forward. "I am Captain. I caught her in the act." She was acting suspicious. Taylor cut him off with a sharp glare. "Acting suspicious? She's a child, Matheson. What in God's name were you thinking? The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ray's bravado faltered under Taylor's piercing stare, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. "Captain, I was following protocol," Ray muttered, his confidence waning. Taylor's voice rose, each word deliberate. "Protocol? Since when does protocol involve arresting an 8-year-old without cause? Did you even check her bag? Did you even ask her anything? Or did you just decide she was guilty?" Ray stammered, struggling for a response. Taylor didn't wait for one. He unlocked the door to the interrogation room, knelt in front of Maya, and gently removed the handcuffs. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now," he said softly, his hands trembling with anger and relief. As he escorted Maya out, he turned back to face the room. "Officer Matheson, you're suspended effective immediate. Internal Affairs will investigate this. And believe me, there will be accountability." The news of Ray's suspension spread quickly, igniting conversations across the department. For some, it was long overdue a reckoning for an officer who had skirted justice for years. For others, it was a divisive move that exposed the cracks in the department's loyalty and ethics. Meanwhile, Taylor's focus shifted to his daughter's well-being. He took her home, where his wife Angela embraced Maya with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. The incident had left a mark on the family, and James knew it wasn't over. The legal and ethical fallout would demand his attention, but so would the emotional scars on his daughter. As the day ended, the department braced itself for the coming days of scrutiny. Reports of the incident had already reached local news outlets, stirring public outrage. Captain Taylor prepared for the battle ahead, determined to hold Ray accountable and confront the systemic failures that had led to this moment. The story had already begun to unravel in the public eye by the next morning. Local news stations aired segments highlighting the arrest of an 8-year-old black girl, and social media was ablaze with outrage. The hashtag Justice for Maya trended nationwide, sparking discussions about racial bias and police misconduct. For the Jackson Police Department, it was a PR nightmare. For Captain Taylor, it was deeply personal. Officer Ray Matheson found himself at the center of the storm. Initially, he tried to dismiss the backlash, claiming he was just doing his job, but as reporters began to dig into his history of complaints, his defenses crumbled. Old accusations of excessive force, racial profiling, and intimidation resurfaced, painting a damning picture of his career. The department was divided. Some officers openly supported Taylor, agreeing that Ray had gone too far. Others felt betrayed, accusing Taylor of throwing a fellow officer under the bus. This rift extended into the community, where long-standing tensions between residents and law enforcement bubbled to the surface. Protests began outside the station, with demands for Matheson's termination and broader reforms. Inside the department, Taylor prepared for an uphill battle. He met with Internal Affairs, presenting his case against Matheson. His evidence was damning. Body camera footage showing Maya's terrified face, statements from witnesses at the store, and a history of unchecked complaints against Ray. "You knew about these complaints, and yet you did nothing," Taylor said, addressing Chief Daniels during a tense meeting. Daniels, an older man known for his cautious approach, leaned back in his chair. "Captain, you know as well as I do how difficult it is to take action without concrete evidence." Matheson's record wasn't spotless, but it wasn't enough to take him off the force. Taylor's jaw tightened. "And now an innocent child has paid the price for our inaction. How many more incidents like this have to happen before we draw the line?" Daniels sighed but offered no rebuttal. The room was silent, the weight of Taylor's words hanging heavily in the air. Meanwhile, Maya struggled to return to her normal routine. Her once bright spirit was dimmed, replaced by fear and hesitation. At school, her classmates whispered about the news reports, and teachers looked at her with pity. Angela, her mother, tried to shield her as best she could, but Maya's nightmares told a different story. Taylor's heart broke every time he saw the fear in his daughter's eyes. He poured himself into his work, determined to make things right. His investigation into Matheson unearthed more than he had anticipated. Beyond the complaints, there were troubling signs of a culture that had allowed officers like Ray to thrive. One discovery stood out, an incident from 3 years prior involving a similar case of racial profiling. The victim, a young black teenager, had filed a complaint against Matheson, but the case was quietly dismissed. The patterns were undeniable, and Taylor knew that addressing Matheson alone wouldn't be enough. As pressure mounted, Ray's FOD began to crack. Confronted with the mounting evidence against him and the growing public outcry, he grew increasingly defensive. In a heated exchange with Taylor in the station's break room, Ray lashed out. "You think you're better than me, Taylor? You think your perfect record gives you the right to judge me?" Ray spat, his face red with anger. Taylor stood his ground, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't about me, Ray. It's about accountability. You crossed a line, and now you have to face the consequences." Ray scoffed, his bravado faltering. "You don't know what it's like out there. Every day, we're targets. We have to act fast, make tough calls." "I did what I thought was right." Taylor's eyes hardened. "You arrested a child, Ray. You didn't think you acted unbiased. And that's exactly why we're here." The confrontation ended with Ray storming out, but the tension lingered. Outside the station, protests continued to grow. Community leaders organized rallies demanding systemic change. Among the speakers was Reverend Clarence Banks, a prominent figure in Jackson's civil rights movement. "This isn't just about one officer or one little girl," Banks declared to the crowd. "This is about a system that has allowed discrimination and injustice to go unchecked for too long. We demand accountability, not just for Maya, but for every victim of police misconduct." Taylor watched the footage from his office, his resolve strengthened. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was determined to see it through. As the protests outside the station swelled, the internal fractures within the Jackson Police Department became harder to ignore. Officers loyal to Matheson quietly voiced their dissent, claiming that Taylor's push for accountability was creating division and undermining morale. This group, led by Sergeant Travis O'Connell, began meeting informally, airing grievances and questioning Taylor's leadership. Meanwhile, Taylor's allies in the department, including Officer Maria Alvarez, saw the situation differently. Alvarez, a young officer with a passion for community outreach, had long criticized the department's lack of transparency and reform. She approached Taylor one evening as he reviewed case files in his office. "Captain," she began hesitantly, "I know it's not my place, but you're doing the right thing. The department needs this reckoning, even if some of us don't want to admit it." Taylor looked up, exhaustion etched into his face. "I appreciate that, Alvarez. But sometimes it feels like I'm fighting a war on two fronts, the department and the public." She nodded. "It's a war worth fighting. If we don't change now, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes." Her words stayed with Taylor as he returned home that night. Maya was asleep, but Angela was waiting for him in the kitchen. She slid a cup of coffee across the table and sat down. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Taylor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's hard, Angie. Every step forward feels like I'm dragging a mountain behind me. And Maya, she's still so scared." Angela reached for his hand. "She'll heal." "But James, this isn't just about Maya. You're fighting for every kid who's ever been in her shoes. Don't lose sight of that." Angela's quiet strength bolstered Taylor's resolve, but new challenges arose as the investigation deepened. Internal Affairs discovered that Matheson's misconduct extended beyond Maya's case. Documents revealed that he had been involved in several incidents where reports were falsified or evidence was mishandled. The department's leadership, particularly Chief Daniels, now faced scrutiny for enabling such behavior. In the meantime, Ray Matheson grew desperate. With his suspension dragging on and public pressure mounting, he sought out allies. Sergeant O'Connell, emboldened by the department's division, assured Ray that they could push back. "They can't touch us if we stick together," O'Connell said during a hushed meeting in a dimly lit diner. "Taylor's just trying to make himself look good. This will blow over if we hold firm." But not everyone was convinced. Some officers who had initially sided with Matheson began to distance themselves as more damning evidence surfaced. The tide was shifting, and Matheson felt it slipping away. As the department grappled with its internal strife, the community's demands for justice grew louder. Reverend Banks spearheaded a coalition of activists, lawyers, and local leaders calling for sweeping reforms. Among their proposals was the establishment of an independent oversight committee to review police conduct. Taylor welcomed the idea, recognizing it as a necessary step toward rebuilding trust. However, implementing such a change would require the cooperation of Chief Daniels and the city council, neither of whom were eager to cede control. At a heated town hall meeting, Taylor stood before a packed room of residents, reporters, and city officials. "This is not about one officer or one mistake," Taylor said, his voice steady but firm. "This is about ensuring that our department serves and protects every member of this community without bias or prejudice. We have to hold ourselves accountable, or we risk losing the trust that is essential to our work." The applause that followed was deafening, but Taylor knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. The situation took another turn when Maya's case gained the attention of national media. A prominent investigative journalist, Danielle Brooks, arrived in Jackson to cover the story. Her report delved into systemic issues within the department, drawing connections between Matheson's actions and broader patterns of misconduct. "Captain Taylor," Danielle said during an interview, "you've been praised for your integrity, but some argue that your efforts are dividing the department. How do you respond to that?" Taylor didn't hesitate. "Change is uncomfortable. Accountability is uncomfortable. But without them, we're doomed to repeat the same failures. If that causes division, so be it. The alternative is far worse." Danielle's story added fuel to the fire, intensifying both public support for Taylor and resistance within the department. As the department neared its breaking point, Matheson made a reckless move. In an attempt to save himself, he leaked sensitive information about the department's internal divisions to a local tabloid, hoping to shift the narrative. The fallout was immediate, further eroding trust within the ranks and alienating many of his remaining allies. Taylor, undeterred, pressed forward. With each new revelation, the case against Matheson and the culture that enabled him became impossible to ignore. The tension within the Jackson Police Department reached a boiling point when Chief Daniels called an emergency meeting. The recent leak had placed the department under an unforgiving spotlight, and the chief knew that decisive action was necessary to salvage its credibility. Seated at the head of the long conference table, Daniels surveyed the room. On one side sat Captain Taylor and his supporters, determined to address the systemic issues that had been unearthed. On the other sat Matheson's dwindling allies, including Sergeant O'Connell, who clung to the belief that the department's unity was more important than accountability. Daniels cleared his throat. "We have a choice to make today," he began. "The public is watching, the media is watching, and most importantly, this department is watching. If we fail to act decisively, we risk everything." The room was silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, Daniels turned to Taylor. "Captain, you've been leading this charge. What's your recommendation?" Taylor didn't hesitate. "Officer Matheson must be terminated immediately, and his case referred to the district attorney for prosecution. But that's only the start. We need to implement the oversight committee the community has called for. Without systemic change, this department will continue to fail the people it serves." A murmur rippled through the room. O'Connell scoffed, leaning forward. "With all due respect, Chief, Taylor's playing politics. You fire Matheson, and you'll lose what little loyalty you have left in this department." Daniels turned to O'Connell, his tone sharp. "And if we don't act, we lose the community's trust entirely. This is bigger than any one officer or any one captain." The decision was clear. By the end of the day, Matheson's termination was made public, and the announcement included plans to establish the Oversight Committee. The news sent shockwaves through the department and the city. While Taylor felt a sense of vindication, he knew the fight was far from over. Matheson, furious and desperate, wasn't about to go down quietly. He enlisted the help of a lawyer with a reputation for exploiting loopholes in misconduct cases, filing a wrongful termination lawsuit against the department. The lawsuit added another layer of complexity to the situation, dividing public opinion and threatening to undermine the progress Taylor had made. The turning point came during a dramatic press conference held by Matheson's lawyer. Standing before a throng of reporters, the lawyer declared, "My client is being scapegoated to cover up the failures of this department. We intend to expose the real corruption at play here." In response, Taylor called his own press conference. Calm and composed, he stood before the cameras and addressed the allegations. "This isn't about scapegoating," Taylor said. "It's about accountability. Officer Matheson's actions are not isolated. They're a symptom of a larger problem. And we're committed to fixing that problem, no matter how uncomfortable it may be." His words resonated with many, but the department's divisions only deepened. Some officers began to question their place in a department undergoing such a seismic shift. Alvarez approached Taylor after the press conference, concern etched on her face. "Captain, we're losing people. Morale is at an all-time low. How do we rebuild from here?" Taylor's expression softened. "By staying the course. Change isn't easy, Alvarez, but it's necessary. We have to show them and the community that this is about creating a department we can all be proud of." Meanwhile, Maya was beginning to reclaim some of her confidence. With the help of a therapist, she started to process the trauma of her arrest. During a quiet moment at home, she approached her father. "Daddy," she said hesitantly, "are you going to fix the bad cops?" Taylor knelt to her level, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm going to do everything I can, sweetheart. I promise." This simple exchange reaffirmed Taylor's resolve. He knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but for Maya and for every child who looked to the police for protection, he was willing to fight. The defining moment came during a city council meeting where the oversight committee was put to a vote. Community leaders, including Reverend Banks, spoke passionately in favor of the proposal, while opponents argued that it would tie the hands of officers in the field. When it was Taylor's turn to speak, he addressed both sides. "Accountability doesn't weaken us. It makes us stronger. If we want to rebuild trust, we need to show that we're willing to hold ourselves to the highest standard. This committee isn't about punishment, it's about progress." The vote passed, and the oversight committee was established. For the first time in decades, there was a tangible sense of hope within the community. Matheson's lawsuit, though contentious, eventually faltered under the weight of evidence against him. When new body camera footage surfaced showing another incident of misconduct, his credibility was irreparably damaged. As Taylor left the courthouse after the lawsuit's dismissal, he was greeted by a small group of protesters who had supported him throughout the ordeal. Among them was Reverend Banks, who clasped Taylor's hand firmly. "You did good, Captain," Banks said. "But the work isn't done." Taylor nodded. "It never is." The passing of the Oversight Committee was a historic moment for Jackson, Mississippi. For the first time, the community felt a glimmer of hope that the justice system might truly begin to serve everyone equally. But with progress came backlash. The Oversight Committee's formation brought sweeping changes, new policies on police conduct, mandatory de-escalation training, and increased transparency in officer discipline. Community leaders hailed it as a victory, but within the department, the mood was tense. Many officers viewed the reforms as an attack on their authority, and a wave of resignations followed. Others chose to remain but resisted the changes, creating friction among the ranks. Captain James Taylor found himself in the eye of the storm. On one hand, he was lauded by activists and reformers as a hero who stood up for justice. On the other, he became a target for those within the department who saw him as a traitor to the badge. One morning, Taylor found an anonymous note taped to his office door. It read, "Traitors don't last long." While Taylor was no stranger to threats, this one struck a nerve. Angela, ever his anchor, urged him to take it seriously. "You're doing the right thing, James," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "But don't think for a second that everyone wants to see you succeed. You need to be careful for you and for us." Taylor nodded, his resolve unwavering, but his worry for his family growing. Meanwhile, Officer Maria Alvarez became a rising voice within the department, advocating for the reforms Taylor had championed. Her efforts to bridge the gap between officers and the community didn't go unnoticed. At a department meeting, she addressed her colleagues with a passionate plea. "We all signed up to protect and serve," Alvarez said, her voice filled with conviction. "If we can't hold ourselves accountable, how can we expect the community to trust us? These changes aren't about taking away our power, they're about making sure we use it responsibly." Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some nodded in agreement, while others sat with arms crossed, unwilling to embrace the shift. The changes also rippled through the community. At Maya's school, her classmates had stopped whispering about the incident, and teachers began using her story as a teaching moment about standing up to injustice. Maya, though still wary of strangers in uniform, started to regain her confidence. Her therapist encouraged her to express her feelings through art, and she created a powerful drawing that depicted her holding hands with her father, standing between her and a shadowy figure in a police uniform. One day, Maya showed the drawing to Taylor. "This is you," she said, pointing to the protective figure. "You stopped the bad guy." Taylor's throat tightened. He hugged her tightly, silently vowing to be the protector she saw in him. In the department, Matheson's departure left a noticeable void. For years, his unchecked behavior had set an unspoken standard for what officers could get away with. His termination sent a clear message that such conduct would no longer be tolerated. However, it also exposed deeper fractures in the department's culture. Chief Daniels, under pressure from the Oversight Committee and community leaders, began implementing mandatory cultural sensitivity training. While some officers participated begrudgingly, others, like Alvarez, saw it as an opportunity to foster meaningful change. At one session, Alvarez paired up with an older officer who had openly criticized the reforms. As they worked through a role-playing exercise, he muttered, "This is a waste of time. The streets don't care about sensitivity." Alvarez looked him in the eye. "Maybe not, but the people who live on those streets do. If we want them to trust us, we need to start showing them that we care." The officer didn't respond, but her words lingered. Outside the department, the ripple effects of Maya's case were felt nationwide. Other cities began examining their own police practices, inspired by the changes in Jackson. Reverend Clarence Banks continued his advocacy, using the momentum from the Oversight Committee's success to push for reforms across the state. Banks and Taylor formed an unlikely alliance. Together, they hosted town halls, speaking candidly about the challenges of reform and the importance of accountability. Though they often disagreed on methods, their shared goal of justice kept them united. During one town hall, a young boy raised his hand and asked Taylor, "Are all cops bad?" Taylor knelt to the boy's level, meeting his curious eyes. "No, they're not. But some forget what their job really is. It's our responsibility to remind them and to make sure they do better." As the weeks turned into months, the department slowly began to stabilize. The officers who remained learned to adapt to the new policies, and the Oversight Committee's presence became a cornerstone of accountability. While resistance still simmered in some corners, the overall culture began to shift. For Taylor, the journey was far from over, but he took solace in the small victories: Maya's healing smile, Alvarez's growing influence, and the community's renewed hope. Months after the Oversight Committee's formation, the changes within the Jackson Police Department were beginning to take root. The transition wasn't seamless, and the resistance was far from over, but the cracks in the old system were slowly being filled with the mortar of accountability and reform. Captain James Taylor found himself facing new challenges every day. From integrating oversight policies into daily operations to managing the morale of his officers, his leadership was tested constantly. Despite the pressure, Taylor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The reforms weren't just about fixing the department, they were about creating a legacy of justice that Maya and future generations could inherit. One of the most significant hurdles was rebuilding trust with the community. Taylor spearheaded initiatives like community policing programs and forums where residents could voice concerns directly to officers. These forums were tense at first, filled with anger and mistrust, but over time, they became a space for honest dialogue. At one forum, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins stood up. Her voice trembled with emotion as she recounted her grandson's run-ins with the police. For years, I told him to stay quiet, to avoid trouble. But what good did it do? Trouble found him anyway. How can we believe anything will change?" Taylor listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. When she finished, he stood and addressed her directly. "You're right to feel the way you do," Taylor said. "For too long, this department has failed families like yours. But we're working to change that. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but I promise you, we're listening and we're taking action." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her skepticism still evident, but softened by Taylor's sincerity. At the station, Officer Maria Alvarez continued to emerge as a leader in her own right. Her efforts to bridge the gap between the department and the community earned her the respect of both sides. She took on a mentorship role with younger officers, teaching them the importance of empathy and cultural awareness. During one patrol, Alvarez was partnered with a rookie officer, Sam Peters. They responded to a call about a disturbance in a predominantly black neighborhood. When they arrived, they were met with wary eyes and crossed arms. Peters tensed, his hand hovering near his holster. Alvarez gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let me handle this," she said softly. Approaching the group, Alvarez greeted them with a calm, respectful tone. She listened to their concerns and de-escalated the situation without incident. When they returned to the car, Peters looked at her with newfound respect. "Is it always like this?" he asked. "Sometimes," Alvarez replied, "but you have to remember they're just as scared of us as we are of them. The only way to change that is to show them we're here to help, not harm." Peters nodded, his perspective beginning to shift. At home, Maya was making strides in her recovery. Through therapy and the unwavering support of her family, she began to reclaim her sense of security. Her artwork became a source of healing and a way to express her emotions. One day, she showed her father a new drawing, a police officer standing under a rainbow, holding hands with a group of children from different backgrounds. "This is what you're doing, Daddy," Maya said, her eyes shining with hope. Taylor was deeply moved. Her resilience reminded him why he had chosen this path. Despite the challenges, he was making a difference, not just for Maya, but for countless others. The department itself began to evolve. The Oversight Committee's regular audits exposed lingering issues, but they also highlighted progress. Officers who had resisted the reforms found themselves outnumbered by those who embraced them. The training programs Alvarez championed became mandatory, and the culture slowly began to shift. One day, Taylor received a visit from Reverend Clarence Banks. The two men had grown to respect one another through their shared efforts to reform the department. "You've come a long way, Captain," Banks said, his tone warm but serious. "But the fight isn't over. There's still work to be done." Taylor nodded. "I know, but we're moving in the right direction. And as long as we keep moving, I think we'll get there." Banks smiled. "You're a good man, Taylor. Keep leading by example." The department's progress wasn't without setbacks. Matheson's lawsuit, though dismissed, left lingering resentment among some officers. A few staged a walkout in protest of the new policies, but their absence only reinforced the department's commitment to change. Taylor addressed the remaining officers at a department-wide meeting. "This isn't just a job," he said. "It's a responsibility. We're here to serve and protect everyone in this community. If you can't stand by that, you're in the wrong place. But if you're willing to work together, we can rebuild trust and make this department something to be proud of." The room was silent for a moment before Alvarez stood and clapped. One by one, other officers joined in, their applause a testament to the slow but steady progress being made. As the months passed, the Jackson Police Department began to feel like a different place. Officers like Alvarez led by example, and programs aimed at fostering trust with the community began to show results. While challenges remained, the department was on a path toward healing and growth. For Taylor, the journey was far from over, but every step forward felt like a victory. Maya's smile, Alvarez's leadership, and the community's growing faith in the department reminded him that change was possible, even in the face of resistance. The Jackson Police Department was finally starting to stabilize, but the shadow of Officer Matheson's actions still lingered. As Captain James Taylor worked tirelessly to implement lasting reforms, the community continued to demand not only change but justice. While Matheson's lawsuit had failed, his supporters both inside and outside the department had not been silenced. A new challenge emerged when leaked documents suggested that Matheson wasn't the only officer guilty of misconduct. A whistleblower from within the department provided the Oversight Committee with a trove of internal records, exposing a network of officers who had routinely abused their power and covered for each other. This revelation threatened to undo the progress Taylor had worked so hard to achieve. The files implicated several high-ranking officers, including Sergeant Travis O'Connell, who had been Matheson's most vocal supporter. As the committee prepared to act, Taylor found himself caught in the middle. He knew that exposing the corruption was the right thing to do, but he also understood the chaos it would bring. "You're risking a mutiny, James," Chief Daniels warned during a private meeting. "If we go after O'Connell and the others, we might lose half the department." Taylor's response was firm. "If we don't, we lose the community's trust and everything we've been fighting for." Daniels nodded reluctant. "Just be ready for the fallout." While Taylor prepared for the storm ahead, the community's trust in the Oversight Committee grew. Reverend Clarence Banks continued to rally support, ensuring that the public stayed engaged and vocal. At a town hall meeting, Banks addressed the latest revelations with his characteristic fervor. "This isn't just about punishing the guilty," he said, his voice resonating through the packed hall. "It's about creating a system where this kind of behavior can never happen again. We stand with Captain Taylor and the Oversight Committee, but we must hold them accountable too. Change isn't a one-time event, it's a commitment." Taylor was present at the meeting, standing quietly in the back. He felt the weight of Banks's words, but also drew strength from the community's support. Meanwhile, Officer Maria Alvarez found herself in a precarious position. As one of the department's rising stars, she had earned the respect of her peers, but her outspoken support for reforms had made her a target. Anonymous threats began appearing in her locker, warning her to back off. She shared the notes with Taylor, who immediately took action. He ordered an investigation and personally addressed the department. "This is unacceptable," Taylor said during a tense meeting. "If anyone here thinks intimidation is the way to handle disagreements, let me make it clear you're wrong. We're here to serve the people, not ourselves. If you can't do that, you don't belong here." The threat stopped, but the tension remained. As the Oversight Committee began reviewing the newly uncovered files, Taylor's team faced a critical decision: how to handle the fallout from exposing the corruption. Alvarez suggested a bold approach. "We need to go public," she said during a strategy meeting. "Transparency is the only way to rebuild trust. If we try to sweep this under the rug, we'll be no better than the people we're investigating." Taylor agreed, but knew the risks. The revelations would undoubtedly cause a backlash, both from within the department and the public. Still, he felt it was the only way forward. The decision was made to hold a press conference, where Taylor and the Oversight Committee would present their findings. In the days leading up to the event, the station buzzed with tension. Officers who supported Taylor braced for the backlash, while those who opposed him prepared to defend their actions. At home, Taylor confided in Angela. "This might be the hardest thing I've ever done," he admitted. "If this goes wrong, it could destroy everything we've worked for." Angela placed a hand on his arm. "You've faced worse, James. You've already changed so much. Trust yourself and trust the people who believe in you." Her words gave him the strength he needed to move forward. On the day of the press conference, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters from across the state gathered outside the station, their cameras trained on the podium where Taylor would soon speak. The crowd included community leaders, activists, and even officers from neighboring departments, all eager to see how the situation would unfold. As Taylor stepped up to the microphone, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. But when he looked out at the faces in the crowd, Maya and Angela among them, he felt a surge of determination. "My name is Captain James Taylor," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "Today, we are taking a step toward accountability, transparency, and justice. The files we've uncovered show a pattern of misconduct that cannot and will not be tolerated. To the people of Jackson, I say this. We hear you, we see you, and we are committed to change. The crowd erupted in applause, but Taylor knew this was only the beginning. The real battle lay ahead, as the department and the community grappled with the implications of the truth. The aftermath of Captain James Taylor's press conference sent shockwaves through Jackson, Mississippi. The whistleblower files were published in full by local media outlets, sparking a citywide uproar. The evidence was irrefutable. Systemic misconduct had been festering within the Jackson Police Department for years, and high-ranking officers like Sergeant Travis O'Connell had played pivotal roles in covering it up. The department erupted into chaos. Officers implicated in the files were placed on administrative leave pending investigation, but the fallout didn't end there. Those loyal to O'Connell and the old ways of operating saw the purge as a betrayal. Taylor found himself facing not just public scrutiny, but an internal mutiny. One night, the tension boiled over. As Taylor left the station after a late meeting, he noticed a group of officers gathered near the parking lot. Their expressions were hard, their stance confrontational. O'Connell stood at the center, his arms crossed and a smug smirk on his face. "You've gone too far, Taylor," O'Connell said as Taylor approached. "You're tearing this department apart for what? To look like a hero in front of the cameras?" Taylor didn't flinch. "I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago. If that makes me unpopular, so be it. But this department is going to change with or without you." O'Connell stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're untouchable. We're not going to let you destroy everything we've built." Before Taylor could respond, Maria Alvarez appeared, flanked by a few officers who supported the reforms. "Back off, O'Connell," she said sharply. "You're outnumbered and out of time. The world's watching, and no one's buying your excuses anymore." The standoff ended without violence, but the message was clear. The department was at a breaking point. The next day, the Oversight Committee held an emergency meeting to address the growing unrest. Reverend Clarence Banks, now a key advisor to the committee, urged swift and decisive action. "We can't let these holdouts undermine the progress we've made," Banks said. "The people of this city are counting on us to follow through." Taylor agreed, but knew the situation required a delicate balance. "We need to show strength, but we also need to keep the lines of communication open. If we alienate every officer who's resistant to change, we'll have nothing left to rebuild with." The committee voted to accelerate their disciplinary actions, permanently terminating officers found guilty of gross misconduct. This included O'Connell, who was stripped of his badge and escorted from the station under heavy media scrutiny. O'Connell's removal was a turning point. The remaining officers, seeing that resistance was futile, began to fall in line. However, the victory was short-lived. Just days later, Taylor received an anonymous tip about a planned retaliation against the reforms. A group of disgruntled officers was allegedly plotting to sabotage an upcoming community policing event, aiming to discredit Taylor and the Oversight Committee. Taylor immediately convened a meeting with Alvarez and his trusted team. "We can't let this happen," he said. "If they succeed, it'll set us back months, maybe years." The team devised a plan to preempt the sabotage. On the day of the event, Alvarez and a team of plainclothes officers monitored the crowd, keeping a close eye on suspicious activity. As the event unfolded, the saboteurs made their move. A small group of off-duty officers attempted to incite a confrontation between the police and community members, planting false evidence to make it appear as though the protesters were armed. Alvarez was quick to act. With her team's help, she intercepted the group and exposed their plot before it could escalate. The confrontation was tense, but Alvarez's leadership and quick thinking prevented a disaster. The saboteurs were arrested on the spot, their actions broadcast live by local news crews. The successful thwarting of the sabotage marked a turning point for Taylor and his allies. The community, once skeptical of the department's ability to reform, rallied behind the captain and his team. Maya, who had been watching the news at home with Angela, hugged her father tightly when he returned that night. "You stopped the bad guys again," she said, her eyes filled with pride. Taylor smiled, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "We're getting there, sweetheart. One step at a time." The next day, Taylor held a press conference to address the incident. Standing alongside Alvarez, Reverend Banks, and members of the Oversight Committee, he spoke directly to the people of Jackson. "This department has faced its share of challenges," Taylor said, "but today we proved that change is possible. To those who doubt our commitment to justice, let this be a reminder: we will not be deterred. We will continue to move forward, no matter the obstacles." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, Taylor felt a genuine sense of hope. Back at the station, Taylor called Alvarez into his office. "You did good out there," he said. "I don't say this enough, but I couldn't do this without you." Alvarez grinned. "Just doing my job, Captain. Besides, someone's got to keep you in line." Taylor chuckled, the weight on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. The climax had passed, and while challenges remained, the department and the community had taken a significant step toward healing. In the weeks following the thwarted sabotage, the Jackson Police Department entered a new era of accountability and trust building. Officers implicated in misconduct faced trials and permanent removal from the force, while the Oversight Committee cemented its role as a vital institution for transparency. Community policing initiatives gained momentum, with officers like Maria Alvarez leading efforts to repair relationships that had been strained for decades. Captain James Taylor became a symbol of change not only in Jackson, but across the state. Local news outlets praised his unwavering commitment to reform, and his story gained national attention. However, Taylor remained humble, always redirecting the spotlight toward the collective efforts of his team and the community. One afternoon, as Taylor walked through the station, he noticed a bulletin board filled with thank you notes and drawings for local children. Among them was one of Maya's drawings, her father standing proudly, his badge gleaming, surrounded by smiling faces of all colors. Captain Alvarez called, breaking Taylor's reverie. She was standing by his office, holding a report. "You're gonna want to see this inside." She handed him a document detailing the department's progress over the last 6 months. Complaints of misconduct had dropped significantly, while community satisfaction surveys showed a marked increase in trust. Taylor smiled. "It's working," he said, more to himself than to Alvarez. "It is," Alvarez replied, "but we've still got a lot of work to do." Taylor nodded. Always at home, Taylor finally allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He sat on the porch with Angela, the warm Mississippi evening wrapping around them like a blanket. "You did it," Angela said, her tone equal parts pride and relief. Taylor shook his head. "We did it. You and Maya kept me going when it felt impossible. I couldn't have done this without you." Angela leaned her head against his shoulder. "Well, I'm proud of you anyway." Inside, Maya was sketching at the kitchen table. Her therapist had suggested she create a future wish drawing, and she had thrown herself into the project with enthusiasm. When Taylor joined her, she held it up proudly, a picture of her family standing in front of a police station, the words, "Safe and happy," scrawled in bright letters across the top. "That's what I want," Maya said, her eyes shining with hope. Taylor hugged her tightly. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As the months turned into years, the Jackson Police Department became a model for reform. The Oversight Committee continued to hold the department accountable, and officers like Alvarez trained new recruits in the principles of integrity and service. Taylor remained at the helm, his resolve never wavering. While he knew the work would never truly be finished, he took solace in the knowledge that he had made a difference for his daughter, for his community, and for the future. 5 years later, Jackson had transformed. The police department was now known statewide for its integrity and transparency, with community leaders and officers working side by side to maintain the progress that had been hard-earned. Captain James Taylor stood at Maya's middle school graduation, his heart swelling with pride as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. After the ceremony, she ran up to him, her face beaming. "Did I make you proud, Daddy?" she asked. "You make me proud every day, Maya," he replied. In that moment, Taylor knew the struggle had been worth it for her and for everyone. The story of Captain Taylor and the Jackson Police Department is a powerful reminder that change is possible when courage, accountability, and unity prevail. It challenges us to reflect on the systems we trust and the voices we choose to amplify. As readers, let this journey inspire you to advocate for justice and equality in your own communities. Share this story with others, spark conversations, and commit to being part of the change. Together, we can build a world where fairness and dignity are not ideals, but everyday realities. What do you think? Would you like any refinements to the final call to action?